Hi friends, Krista here. Thank you so much for stopping by Books and Jams again today. I am really excited to share with you my final April wrap-up. I don't know how exactly I'm going to do this because I've talked about a lot of these books in other videos throughout the month. I guess I'll say that in total I read 15 books, which is not slowing down. One of my goals for this year was to slow down, but I just read some really great books in April. 4 of them were 5-star reads, and a handful others of them were 4-star reads. So it's just really fantastic reading month for me. I did already in a mid-month wrap-up talk about Sparks Like Stars by Nadia Hashimi, which I no longer have because I returned it to the library. 3 NetGalley books, Meet Me in the Margins by Melissa Ferguson, On a Night Like This by Lindsay Kelk, and Games in a Ballroom by Gentry Flint. All 3 were NetGalley books, so I was really pleased to knock out some of those. I also talked about The Printed Letter Bookshop by Catherine Ray, who's an author that I would like to read all of her books that I own this year. And I talked about When Mockingbirds Sing by Billy Coffey, who is one of my 4 authors that I would like to try this year. And that means that I have 3 or more books of his on my shelf, and I just wanted to give him a try. And so I did, completed that part of that goal. The second or third week of April was the Booklist Readathon, and I completed, 5 books. 4 books I completed during that week. I finished up another one and I started another one. So I have 6 books that I'll talk about really quickly because I feel like I talked about them quite a bit in that vlog from Booklist Readathon. So at the beginning of that week, I finished Piranesi by Susanna Clark. Very weird book. It's definitely going in my unhaul pile. Maybe my least favorite of the month. Definitely my least favorite of the month. I did give it 3 stars. It was interesting and it was strange. I am glad that I read it, but I don't think I'll ever read it again. One of the things that I know about myself as a reader is that I prefer more concrete endings. I like to know what happened, where things went, how it's going to wrap up. I don't mind every once in a while an ambiguous ending, and I wouldn't exactly call this ambiguous. It just doesn't give you a solid answer about what was going on throughout the story. Somebody described it as, at the beginning, Piranesi is super confident and the reader has no clue what's going on. And then those roles kind of swap as you read. And as the reader starts to know more, Piranesi gets less and less confident in who he is and where he is and all of that, which is true. So it was interesting. I don't see how it was a favorite for so many people. And I'm definitely never reading it again. But I did it. I read it. And I think I talked about all that already. A book that I did give 5 stars to that week was The Lost Man by Jane Harper. Love, love, love this mystery set in the Australian outback. We follow 3 brothers, one who is dead right at the beginning of the book. And we kind of go on this journey to figure out what happened to Cam, the brother who died. My favorite thing about Jane Harper is that the setting plays a huge, huge, huge role in her stories and in the feel, and the vibe when you're reading them. Another book that I loved during that week was Where the Stars Meet the Sea by Heidi Kimball. This is a sweet romance. Absolutely loved it. Juliet is kind of waiting until her 21st birthday to receive the inheritance left to her from her father and take full control over like her life and her little brother's life. She, with her aunt, who's a little bit overbearing, goes to stay at this other house, and she meets this man in one of the rooms who says something rude to her, and she immediately is rude back to him, and she's very strong-willed and smart-mouthed, and comes to find out that that's the Duke. And everyone kind of bows to him and tiptoes around him, and she definitely does not do that. And of course, there's love. There's love between them. Loved that book. So good. And I really am interested in reading more from Heidi Kimball. Another one that I really enjoyed that week was The Secrets of Paper and Ink by Lindsay Harrell. This is a Christian fiction novel, and we follow these 2 women brought together in this bookstore in England. Sophia is actually a counselor in the United States, but she has experienced some trauma and is having a really hard time getting over it and moving beyond it. So she kind of takes this extended vacation in England, and it's almost like an Airbnb where you can live at the bookstore and also help take care of it. And she has always loved English literature and has always been a source of comfort and solace for her. And so she jumps at this chance to stay there and to help out at the bookstore. Really becomes good friends with the bookstore owner, who is also struggling with her marriage. Her husband has just kind of taken off and left her to deal with this bookstore, which is not doing that great. And so together, these two women kind of band together to help the bookstore. In the process, Sophia finds this journal of this woman from, I don't know, the past. I don't know how long ago. And the story of this woman that comes through from her journals really impacts both Sophia and Ginny's lives and the bookstore itself. So very cool. Loved it. The Secrets of Paper and Ink, and that cover is stunning. At the end of the week for Booklist Backlist, I was traveling to DC and I listened to this little tiny book. It's an audiobook. I found the book, but I cannot find the dust jacket. It's in this room somewhere. But this is, oh man, let me find the title page because I'll get it wrong. And every morning the way home gets longer and longer. What a beautiful little story about dementia. And we have 3 generations, a grandfather and his son and the grandson, and their relationship and the ins and outs of that. It's such a short little book, but it's just beautifully told. And I knew I was going to cry, but as I was listening, I was doing good. I wasn't crying. But then by the end, I was weeping and I could not pull it together. I continued to cry for a few minutes after listening to it. It just was very moving, very touching. I love Frederick Bachman's writing. Oh, so much. Oh, so much. And the final book that I started during Booklist Backlist and finished right at the end of the month, really, is A Fine Romance by Susan Branch, Falling in Love with the English Countryside. This is a nonfiction travel journal, and it's actually written, I think she published it herself, Vineyard Stories. She lives on Martha's Vineyard. I think she published it herself, and it's just filled with photographs and watercolors. I mean, and it's written in her handwriting, like she wrote it. And it's her story of taking the Queen Mary 2 on a Atlantic crossing over to England, and her and her husband traveling around the English countryside. They go to Beatrix Potter's house. They go to Jane Austen's house. They go through many a garden. And at the very beginning, we also get their love story, like how she and her husband met and got together. I really loved this. I thought it was very sweet. I think I ended up giving it 4 stars. I loved all the pictures. It just felt cozy. It felt cozy to me. There were times towards the end where there were bits and pieces where it was a little bit slow, or we're like, okay, we're going through another garden. The flowers that I don't know what they look like. There were a couple parts towards the end that felt a little slow, but did it make me want to go to England? 1000% yes. 1000% yes. I loved it. It was very, very cool. I just have 3 left now that I read right at the end of the month. When I was driving up and back to my mom's, which is also in a vlog, so I feel like I've talked about this one too. The Songbook of Benny Lament by Amy Harmon was my least favorite. This is my 5th. I think this is my 5th Amy Harmon book now. And it's my least favorite of the 5. For sure. We follow Benny Lament, who is an Italian. His dad is part of the Italian mafia. Benny himself is a very musical, very talented songwriter and pianist. He meets a singer named Esther Mine, who is very, very talented singer, has a huge voice, and we know how petite she is because it talks about it every single time she's mentioned. But Esther and Benny have a very sparkly relationship, like sparks fly. Not in a chemistry, I want to jump your bones way, but she's just very witty and strong. He just can't stop thinking about her. So this takes place in the 1960s. So we're dealing with the mob, the mafia, the family. We're also dealing with the beginnings, kind of, or not the beginnings, but Motown Records started in the 1960s. And Esther Mine that's the kind of music that she sings, a little bit of blues and a little bit of jazz, a little bit of Motown, a little bit of everything. We're also getting kind of the race issue because she is an African-American woman, but she has a white mother and a black father. So that comes into play, race issues in the 1960s, civil rights movement comes into play. There's just so many different elements that are in this book. And I don't think I cared really about any of it. And I was super annoyed with the fact that she was described as being petite and tiny in every single time we got to see her. I just didn't like that. I get it. We know what she looks like. You described her once. or twice even, but like every single time she's tiny. They even have a song that they wrote called Itsy Bitsy to talk about how small she is. I'm like, ugh, enough already. On the way home from my trip to New York, I listened to my patron book club book for the month, which is Dear Mrs. Bird by AJ Pierce. Why did I wait so long to read this book? I absolutely loved this book. In it, we follow Emmy Lake. She is a hopeful journalist, gets a job that she thinks is at a newspaper. Turns out it's as a junior typist for this women's magazine. She's a little bit jaded by that. Mrs. Bird, who writes the advice column, is very old and set in her ways and refuses to respond to women who write in about relationships or marriage issues or anything that might be private in nature. She refuses. It's set in London during World War II, so that is also a huge part of the story. And the first, maybe third or half even is kind of light in tone. I've laughed out loud a couple times, but then there's definitely a shift. And it's almost jarring because they talk about the bombs going off every night and hearing the planes overhead. And Emmy volunteers at the fire station, answering phone calls and working closely with the fire brigade, going out and helping people. You see the seriousness of what they're living through, but there is a lightness to it. But then there's a definite shift as the book goes on. And there were a couple scenes that were rather intense and heavy and sad. Emmy has a friendship in here that has to go through some pretty serious situations. And I just really loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. I cannot wait to talk about this. In a couple hours, I'm going to be talking about this with my patrons, and I'm very, very excited to hear what everyone else thought about it. I liked it so much that as soon as I came home, I went on Scribd and I got Yours Cheerfully, which is the sequel, because there is one storyline that doesn't quite get wrapped up in here. I loved how this one ended, but I was just like, I want to know more about that. And that is definitely in this one. I give this one 4 stars. I didn't quite love it as much as the first one, for sure. But I did like the continuation of the story. So because it's a sequel, I can't tell you too much about how the story continues. But in this one, the women's magazine where Emmy works and other newsprint and newspapers and magazines are called upon by the War Office, by the Ministry of War, by the government to help encourage women to step up and take on some roles in factories and in other ways, because the men are off fighting. So they're really like relying on these news sources and women's magazines and such to call upon women to step up for the war effort. In her role at the women's magazine, interviews some women who work at a munitions factory, finds out that everything is not quite as it seems, and really gets to know these women and their situation, and is kind of pulled between how do we continue to encourage women to sign up because it's so needed and we all want to do our part to win the war, but also help women who are in these roles at at factories and other places, but also have the responsibility of caring for things at home. And somehow those two things don't always mix well. Who's going to take care of the kids? How are we going to get dinner on the table? We're not getting paid as much as the men were getting paid. And my husband died and now I don't get a pension from him from the army anymore. Like all of these issues that come up as she's interviewing these women and talking to the owners and the directors and whatever of the factories, and that push and pull that she feels. So it's super interesting. And we do get some continuation of the story from the first one that kind of runs throughout this one as well. I really liked this. I was very, very pleased to read a sequel right after I read the first one. So yay me. And that is it for my April wrap up. Very exciting. I got some goals knocked out at the beginning of the month. I had some fabulous reads. I read some backlists that have been on my shelves for a long time. It just was a really, really good reading month. A really good reading month. So I would love to chat with you down below. How was your April? Did you get a lot of really good books in? Did you read just a little bit? Were you in a slump? Did you find a new favorite? Let's talk about these books or any of your books that you've been reading. I hope you know by now that I absolutely love talking with you in the comments. It's something that I it's maybe one of my favorite parts about this channel is getting to chat with you in the comments. So I hope that you talk with me down there. And I really appreciate you watching. It means the world to me that you spent a few minutes listening to me ramble on about my reading in April. And I look forward to talking with you in another video very soon. Bye.